If you think you know what hell looks like, think again. Before you dive into the darkest corners of America's most brutal prison, smash that subscribe button, hit the like, and drop a comment telling me if you could survive even one day in this concrete tomb. You're going to need that courage for what's coming next. The wind screams across the barren Colorado plains like a warning, carrying dust and secrets across 13 acres of reinforced concrete and steel. ADX Florence sits in the middle of nowhere, a monument to human cruelty disguised as justice. The locals call it the Alcatraz of the Rockies, but that name doesn't capture the true horror of what happens behind those walls. This isn't just a prison. It's a place where the worst of the worst disappear, where time stops moving, and where the only sound you'll hear is your own sanity cracking like ice on a frozen lake. On a frigid morning in November 2019, Dr. Sarah Chin walked through the outer security gates of ADX Florence for what would become the most disturbing week of her career. She was a forensic psychologist, 38 years old, with credentials from Harvard and a reputation for getting inside the minds of killers. She'd interviewed serial murderers, examined mass shooters, and testified in death penalty cases that made national headlines. She thought she'd seen everything. She was wrong. Dr. Chin had been commissioned by the Department of Justice to conduct a confidential evaluation of conditions inside ADX Florence. There had been whispers, rumors leaking from former guards and prison officials who couldn't sleep at night anymore. Stories about inmates losing their minds, about torture disguised as security protocol, about men who'd been locked in 7 by 12-foot cells for so long they'd forgotten what sunlight felt like. The government wanted answers, and they wanted them quietly. The concrete walls of ADX Florence rise from the earth like a fortress built to contain monsters. Every inch of this facility was designed with one purpose: to break the human spirit completely. The architecture itself is a weapon. Soundproof cells, remotely controlled steel doors, pressure pads that detect the slightest movement, cameras in every corner, watching, recording, analyzing. The prisoners here aren't just locked away from society. They're locked away from reality itself. As Dr. Chin moved through the security checkpoints, each one more invasive than the last, she felt the weight of the place pressing down on her chest. The air inside smelled like industrial cleaner trying to mask something darker underneath. Fear, maybe. Or desperation. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with a sound that burrowed into your skull and stayed there. Every surface was hard, cold, unforgiving. This place wasn't built for rehabilitation. It was built for revenge. Her escort was a corrections officer named Marcus Webb, a man in his mid-40s with the kind of face that had seen too much and stopped reacting years ago. He'd worked at ADX Florence for 12 years, longer than most guards could handle before they quit or transferred to easier facilities. His eyes were flat, emotionless, like he'd learned to shut off whatever part of him felt sympathy or horror. "You ever been inside a Supermax before, Doc?" Webb asked as they walked down a corridor that seemed to stretch into infinity. His voice echoed off the concrete in a way that made it sound like multiple people were talking at once. "I've toured facilities," Dr. Chin replied, adjusting the ID badge clipped to her blazer. "Nothing quite like this." Webb almost smiled, but it was a bitter expression, the kind you make when someone tells a joke that isn't funny. "Nothing anywhere is quite like this. The men in here, they're not just criminals. They're legends. Terrorists, cartel leaders, mob bosses, serial killers. If they made the news, if they caused enough chaos, if they scared the right people, they end up here. And once they're here, they don't leave. Not alive, anyway." The first cell Dr. Chin visited belonged to a man named Robert Khalid. Before ADX Florence, Khalid had been a rising star in one of Mexico's most brutal drug cartels. He'd personally ordered the deaths of over 200 people, including women and children. He'd bombed a federal courthouse in Arizona. He'd threatened to kill the President of the United States on live television. At 36 years old, he'd already spent 8 years in complete isolation. When the cell door slid open with a hydraulic hiss that sounded like something breathing, Dr. Chin saw Khalid sitting on his concrete bed, staring at the wall. He didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge their presence. He just sat there, motionless, like a statue carved from damaged flesh. The cell was exactly 7 feet wide and 12 feet long. A concrete slab for a bed. A stainless steel toilet and sink combination bolted to the wall. A small desk, also concrete, attached to the floor. A single window, 4 inches wide, positioned so high that all Khalid could see was a thin slice of sky. No color. No life. Just concrete and steel and silence. "Mr. Khalid," Dr. Chen said softly, stepping into the cell while Webb remained in the doorway, hand resting on his pepper spray. "My name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I'm here to talk with you about your experience at this facility." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Khalid turned his head, slowly, mechanically, like his neck muscles had forgotten how to move properly. When Dr. Chen saw his face, she felt her stomach twist. His eyes were completely empty, hollow, like someone had reached inside his skull and scooped out whatever made him human. His skin was pale, almost translucent from years without natural sunlight. His hands trembled constantly, a side effect of the antipsychotic medications the prison doctors had prescribed to keep him from hurting himself. "Experience," Khalid whispered, and his voice cracked like he hadn't used it in days. "You want to know about my experience?" "Yes," Dr. Chen said, sitting down on the concrete floor across from him, trying to seem less threatening. "I want to understand what life is like here. What a typical day looks like for you." Khalid laughed, but it was the sound of something breaking inside a person's chest. A typical day. Wake up. Stare at the wall. Eat food passed through a slot. Stare at the wall. Maybe they let me out for 1 hour in a concrete recreation cage. Stare at different walls. Come back. Stare at the wall. Sleep. Dream about walls. Wake up. Do it again. Forever." "How long has it been since you had a conversation with another inmate?" Dr. Chen asked, pulling out her notebook. "I don't know. 2 years. 3. Time doesn't exist here, doctor. There's no clocks. No calendars. No windows that show you anything real. You stop knowing if it's day or night. You stop knowing what month it is, what year. They want you to forget you're human. And eventually you do." Dr. Chen wrote rapidly, documenting everything. But something in Khalid's voice made her look up. There was something else there, beneath the broken monotone. Something calculating. "You seem different than I expected," she said carefully. Khalid's empty eyes suddenly focused on her with an intensity that made her want to leave the cell immediately. "Different how?" "The reports say you've been violent. That you've attacked guards, destroyed your cell, refused all treatment. But right now you seem calm. Cooperative." "Maybe I'm tired of fighting," Khalid said. "Or maybe I'm waiting for something." "Waiting for what?" Before he could answer, Webb's radio crackled to life. A voice came through, distorted and urgent. "All units to control. We have a situation in D block. Inmate down. Medical emergency. All units respond." Webb grabbed Dr. Chen's arm, pulling her out of the cell. "We need to move. Now." "What's happening?" Dr. Chen asked as the cell door slammed shut behind them, sealing Khalid back inside his concrete tomb. "D block," Webb said, already running down the corridor. "That's where we keep the worst of the worst. If something's happening there, it's bad." They ran through a maze of corridors, each one identical to the last, a disorienting labyrinth designed to confuse anyone trying to escape. Other guards joined them, moving with practiced efficiency, weapons drawn. The air felt electric with tension, like the moment before lightning strikes. When they reached D block, the scene was chaos. 3 guards stood outside cell number 17, shouting into radios. Inside the cell, visible through the reinforced window, was a body hanging from a sheet tied to the ventilation grate. The man was motionless, face purple, eyes bulging. But what made Dr. Chen's blood turn to ice wasn't the suicide itself. It was what was written on the walls. Using his own blood, the dead inmate had painted words across every surface of his cell. The same phrase, over and over, hundreds of times, covering the concrete like wallpaper made of madness. "They're watching us. They're listening. They know everything. Get out while you still can." "Jesus Christ," one of the guards whispered. How long was he doing this? We check every cell every hour, Webb said, his voice shaking for the first time. This wasn't here 45 minutes ago. How did he do this in 45 minutes? Dr. Chin moved closer to the cell window, reading the words again and again. Her training told her this was a psychotic break, a paranoid delusion brought on by isolation. But something else, something deeper in her gut, whispered a different truth. This wasn't random madness. This was a warning.
Who was he? She asked.
Webb checked his clipboard, his hands trembling slightly. Patrick Donovan. Former FBI agent. Went rogue, started selling classified information to foreign governments. He'd been here for 6 years. An FBI agent, Dr. Chin repeated. Someone trained to handle stress, trained to resist interrogation. And he did this. We need to seal this area, Webb said, already backing away from the cell. This is a crime scene now. Doc, you need to leave. This part of your evaluation is over. But Dr. Chin couldn't move. She was staring at one section of the wall where the words were different, where Donovan had written something else in letters twice as large as the rest. They're not just watching the inmates. They're watching you too, Sarah. Her name. He'd written her name on the wall. But that was impossible. She'd only arrived at the facility that morning. She hadn't met Patrick Donovan. He couldn't have known she was coming. Nobody could have told him. Webb, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He knew my name. Webb turned back, saw what she was looking at, and his face went completely white. That's not possible. But it's there. Look at it. He wrote my name. Other guards were crowding around now, seeing the same thing, their expressions shifting from shock to fear. Someone turned off their radio. Someone else whispered a prayer. The temperature in the corridor seemed to drop 10 degrees in an instant. We need to evacuate this section, one of the senior guards said, his authority cracking like thin ice.
Right now.
Everyone out. As they moved back toward the main corridor, Dr. Chin kept looking over her shoulder at cell 17, at the blood-written warnings covering every inch of space. Her mind was racing, trying to find a rational explanation. Coincidence? Lucky guess. Someone had leaked her name to the prison population somehow. But deep down, in a place that academic training couldn't reach, she knew something else was happening here. Something that didn't fit into her textbooks or her experience. Patrick Donovan hadn't been crazy. He'd been terrified. And now, walking through the corridors of ADX Florence with guards who couldn't meet her eyes, Dr. Sarah Chen understood why. They reached a secure office where Webb told her to wait while they processed the scene. She sat in a metal chair, staring at her notebook, trying to make sense of what she'd seen. But the words kept swimming in front of her eyes, refusing to form coherent patterns. An hour passed. Then 2. Nobody came to update her. Nobody explained what was happening. The office had no windows, no clock, just fluorescent lights that buzzed like insects trapped in a jar. She was starting to understand what the inmates felt, this sense of time becoming meaningless, of reality bending at the edges. Finally, the door opened. But it wasn't Webb. It was a woman in her 50s, wearing an expensive suit that looked completely out of place in this brutal environment. Her hair was pulled back severely, and her eyes were the coldest Dr. Chen had ever seen. Eyes that had signed death warrants and slept perfectly fine afterward. Dr. Chen, the woman said, not offering her hand. I'm Amanda Reeves, Deputy Director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. We need to talk about what you saw today. Who is Patrick Donovan really? Dr. Chen asked immediately. And how did he know my name? Reeves closed the door behind her, the lock clicking with a finality that made Dr. Chen's pulse quicken. Those are complicated questions with complicated answers. But before we get into that, I need you to understand something very clearly. What happens at ADX Florence stays at ADX Florence. The work we do here, the security measures we employ, they're classified at the highest levels. Do you understand? I understand that a man killed himself after writing a warning on his walls. A warning that included my name. I understand that's not normal, even for a Supermax prison. Normal, Reeves repeated, a bitter smile crossing her face. Nothing about this facility is normal, Doctor. We house the most dangerous criminals in the world. People who would kill you without a second thought. People who still have connections on the outside, who still have ways of getting information. Patrick Donovan was one of them. He had resources. Contacts. He probably found out about your evaluation the same day we approved it. Then why did he kill himself today? Right before I could interview him. Reeves was quiet for a moment, studying Dr. Chun like she was trying to decide how much truth to reveal. Because he was guilty. Because he couldn't face what he'd done anymore. Because after 6 years of isolation, his mind finally broke. Take your pick, doctor. They're all true. You're lying, Dr. Chen said, surprising herself with her own boldness. I've interviewed hundreds of criminals. I know what guilty looks like. What I saw on those walls wasn't guilt. It was fear. Pure, absolute terror. Then maybe he was afraid of being judged by someone like you. Someone who would document his deterioration, his weakness. These men, even in here, they have pride. Ego. Maybe facing the truth of what he'd become was more than he could handle. Dr. Chen stood up, gathering her notebook and bag. I need access to Donovan's prison records. Medical files, incident reports, visitor logs, everything. That's classified. Then my evaluation is over. I'll submit my preliminary findings to the Department of Justice and recommend a full federal investigation into conditions here. I'll make sure every senator, every representative, every news outlet knows what I saw today. Reeves's cold eyes flashed with something dangerous. You signed a non-disclosure agreement, Doctor. If you violate it, you'll spend the rest of your life fighting legal battles that will destroy your career and your reputation. Then I guess we're at an impasse. The silence in the room was suffocating. Outside, somewhere in the labyrinth of concrete corridors, men were locked in cells, counting the minutes until death or insanity, whichever came first. And now Dr. Sarah Chun understood that she was trapped too, in a different kind of cell, but trapped nonetheless. Finally, Reeves reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. She placed it on the table between them like a dealer laying down cards in a dangerous game. 3 months ago, Reeves said quietly, we noticed something strange happening at ADX Florence. Inmates who shouldn't have any way of communicating with each other were somehow coordinating, sharing information, planning something. We don't know what yet, but we know it's happening. And we know Patrick Donovan was at the center of it. Dr. Chen opened the folder. Inside were surveillance photos, transcripts of monitored conversations, incident reports. And there, on the 3rd page, was something that made her heart stop. A list of names. Inmates who'd been acting strangely. Inmates who'd all been seen talking to themselves in their cells, as if someone was listening. Inmates who'd all written similar messages on their walls before the guards could stop them. 17 names total. And at the bottom of the list, in handwriting that looked disturbingly familiar, someone had added an 18th name. Dr. Sarah Chun. But when they opened the locked basement door, what they found changed everything. The folder slipped from Dr. Chen's hands, photographs scattering across the cold metal table like evidence at a crime scene. Her name, written in the same desperate scrawl she'd seen on Patrick Donovan's cell wall, stared back at her from the bottom of the list. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to flicker, or maybe that was just her vision blurring at the edges as reality tilted sideways. Where did you get this? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the buzzing lights. Amanda Reeves gathered the photographs with practiced efficiency, her face betraying nothing. We found it in Donovan's cell 3 weeks ago, hidden inside a crack in the concrete behind his toilet. He'd been chipping away at the wall for months, creating a small hollow space. When we discovered it, your name was already there, Doctor. 3 weeks before you were even approved for this evaluation. That's impossible. The approval process was confidential. Only a handful of people at the Department of Justice even knew I was being considered. Exactly, Reeves said, leaning forward. Which means either someone on the inside leaked the information, or these inmates have access to intelligence-gathering capabilities that shouldn't exist inside the most secure prison in the United States. Either possibility is terrifying. Dr. Chen's mind raced through the possibilities, her training kicking in despite the fear coursing through her veins. You think there's a mole? Someone working here who's feeding information to the prisoners. We've considered that theory. We've investigated every guard, every staff member, every contractor who's set foot in this facility over the past year. Nothing. Everyone checks out. No unusual bank deposits, no suspicious contacts, no red flags whatsoever. If there's a mole, they're either incredibly sophisticated or they don't exist. Then how? Reeves stood up, walking to the door, but not opening it. She seemed to be wrestling with a decision, weighing how much truth to reveal. Finally, she turned back to Dr. Chin, and for the first time, there was genuine fear in those cold eyes. What I'm about to tell you is classified at levels that officially don't exist. If you repeat any of this outside this room, they won't just destroy your career. They'll make you disappear. Do you understand? Dr. Chin nodded, her mouth too dry to speak. 12 years ago, Reeves began, the CIA developed a program called Panopticon. The goal was to create a surveillance system so advanced, so pervasive, that it could monitor every communication, every transaction, every movement of high-value targets anywhere in the world. They succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. But like all weapons, Panopticon had a flaw. It was too good. Too powerful. So powerful that the people operating it started to realize they could use it for purposes beyond national security. What kind of purposes? Control. Blackmail. Profit. 3 years after the program launched, 7 of the 12 original operators disappeared. Just vanished. No trace, no bodies, no explanation. The government shut down Panopticon, or at least they claimed to. They dismantled the infrastructure, destroyed the servers, prosecuted the remaining operators. But the technology, the knowledge of how it worked, that couldn't be destroyed. And we think someone inside ADX Florence has it. Dr. Chin felt like the floor was dropping away beneath her feet. You're telling me that inmates inside a Supermax prison have access to intelligence-level surveillance technology? Not just access. Control. We believe they're watching us, Doctor. They're watching the guards, the staff, everyone who enters this facility. They know what we're planning before we do it. They know our weaknesses, our secrets, our fears. And they're using that knowledge to build something. A network. An organization. Right here, in the place designed to keep the world's most dangerous criminals isolated from each other. That's insane. They're in solitary confinement. They can't even see each other, let alone coordinate some kind of massive surveillance operation. Insane is what we thought too, Reeves said, returning to the table and pulling out more documents. Until we started connecting the dots. 6 months ago, a guard named Thomas Rivera quit suddenly. Good employee, no disciplinary issues, respected by his colleagues. He just walked out one day and never came back. We found him 3 weeks later in a motel in Nevada, dead from an apparent overdose. But the autopsy revealed something interesting. He had $750,000 in various offshore accounts, money that appeared in the week before he died. She laid out another photograph, a bank statement with transactions highlighted in yellow. The money came from shell corporations linked to known cartel operations. Operations run by inmates currently housed in ADX Florence. Rivera was transporting something for them. We don't know what, but it was valuable enough to pay him $750,000. And you think this is connected to Donovan's suicide? Donovan wasn't just an FBI agent. He was a signals intelligence specialist. He understood surveillance systems, encryption, electronic warfare. If anyone could reverse engineer or recreate something like Panopticon with limited resources, it would be him. And before he was caught, he'd been selling classified information to 12 different foreign governments. He had connections everywhere. Resources hidden all over the world. Dr. Chin picked up the list of names again, studying each one. The inmates ranged from cartel leaders to domestic terrorists, from mob bosses to hackers who'd brought down entire corporations. Each one had skills, resources, and networks that reached far beyond these concrete walls. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Your evaluation was supposed to be a cover story," Reeves admitted. "We needed an outside expert, someone who could move through the facility, interview inmates, observe patterns without raising suspicion. Someone smart enough to recognize what they were seeing, but not connected to any law enforcement or intelligence agency. You were perfect. You used me as bait. We needed to understand what they know, how they're getting their information. Your arrival would create ripples. We'd watch how the inmates reacted, what questions they asked, whether they revealed any of their intelligence sources. And it worked. Donovan's reaction, his suicide, the message he left, it tells us they're worried. They know we're getting close to something. Dr. Chen felt anger rising in her chest, hot and sharp. You put me in danger without telling me. You manipulated me into coming here, knowing these inmates might target me. We've had protection in place from the moment you arrived. Surveillance on your hotel, your car, your phone. If anyone tried to approach you, we'd know immediately. You were never in real danger. Tell that to Patrick Donovan. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths. Reeves collected the photographs again, preparing to return them to her briefcase, but Dr. Chen stopped her. Wait. Show me the other names. The inmates on that list. I want to know who we're dealing with. Reeves hesitated, then spread the documents across the table. 17 names, 17 faces, 17 stories of violence and chaos. Dr. Chen studied each one, committing them to memory. Vincent Marquez, cartel enforcer responsible for bombing a federal building in Texas. 23 confirmed kills, suspected in over 100 more. He'd been in ADX Florence for 9 years. James Crawford, white supremacist leader who'd orchestrated attacks on synagogues and mosques across the Midwest. 16 people dead, dozens injured. 7 years in isolation. Dmitry Volkov, Russian intelligence operative caught running a spy network that compromised national security at the highest levels, responsible for the deaths of 4 CIA agents. 11 years locked away. The list went on. Each name represented a different kind of nightmare, a different flavor of evil. But they all had one thing in common. They were brilliant. Every single one of them had demonstrated exceptional intelligence, planning ability, and ruthlessness. They weren't random psychopaths. They were strategists, leaders, architects of chaos. If these men are working together, Dr. Chen said slowly, if they've found a way to coordinate despite the isolation, then we're not dealing with a prison problem. We're dealing with a criminal conspiracy that spans international borders and multiple organizations. This is bigger than ADX Florence. Much bigger, Reeves agreed. And we only have pieces of the puzzle. We know something's being planned. We know it involves significant resources and coordination. But we don't know what the endgame is. That's where you come in, Doctor. We need you to interview these inmates. Get inside their heads. Find out what they're planning before it's too late. And if they try to recruit me, if they try to use me as another asset like they did with Rivera, then you play along. Feed us information. Help us build the case we need to shut this down permanently. Dr. Chen looked at the list again, at her own name written at the bottom in that desperate handwriting. She thought about Patrick Donovan, hanging in his cell, his final message painted in blood across the walls. She thought about the years of training, the hundreds of interviews, all the times she'd looked into the eyes of killers and convinced herself she understood them. But this was different. This was evolution. These inmates had adapted to their environment, had found ways to thrive even in the most restrictive conditions humanity could create. They'd turned their prison into a headquarters, their isolation into protection. They were building something in the darkness, and she was being asked to step into that darkness willingly. I want full access, she said finally. No restrictions, no supervision beyond basic security. I want to interview each of these inmates alone, without guards listening in. If they're going to trust me with anything, they need to believe I'm not just another government tool. Reeves considered this, her face unreadable. That's dangerous. These men are manipulative, charismatic, and have nothing to lose. They'll try to get inside your head, twist your perceptions, make you doubt everything you believe. That's what I do every day, Director Reeves. I've sat across from serial killers who wanted to make me their next victim. I've interviewed terrorists who saw me as a representative of everything they wanted to destroy. I can handle it. Can you? Because once you start down this path, there's no going back. These inmates, they're not just criminals. They're survivors. They've outlasted federal prosecutors, survived assassination attempts from rival organizations, resisted interrogation techniques designed by experts. They're the best at what they do. And what they do is destroy people. Dr. Chen stood up, gathering her notebook and bag with steady hands despite the fear singing through her nerves. Then I'll be better. Set up the interviews. Starting tomorrow, I want to meet with Vincent Marquez. Why Marquez? Because according to this file, he hasn't spoken to anyone, staff or inmates, in over 2 years. Complete silence. If I can get him to talk, it means they're willing to reveal something. And whatever that something is, it's important enough to break 2 years of silence. Reeves studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. But Dr. Chen, understand this. If something goes wrong, if they manage to turn you or use you in a way that compromises security, I won't hesitate to cut you loose. You'll be labeled a security threat, and you'll disappear into the system just like they did. Are we clear? Crystal. As Dr. Chen left the office, escorted by a silent guard through the maze of corridors, she felt the weight of 17 pairs of eyes watching her, even though she couldn't see any of them. The inmates were locked in their cells, separated by concrete and steel, but somehow they were connected. Somehow they were watching. The guard led her to a different exit than the one she'd used that morning, taking her through sections of the prison she hadn't seen before. They passed through a corridor, lined with cells that seemed older, more worn than the others. The concrete was stained with something that might have been rust or might have been blood. The air smelled different here, like decay and desperation. As they walked, Dr. Chen noticed something strange. Every few cells, there were scratches on the walls outside the doors. Not random marks, but deliberate patterns. Lines and dots arranged in sequences that looked almost like code. "What are those marks?" she asked the guard. He glanced at them without much interest. "Inmates make them sometimes. Counting days, leaving messages, whatever. We clean them off when we catch them, but they just make new ones." But Dr. Chen recognized the patterns. She'd seen similar markings in her research on organized crime, on gang communications, on intelligence operations. These weren't random scratches. They were messages. A language written in plain sight, invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for. She stopped walking, pulling out her phone to take a picture before remembering that phones weren't allowed inside the facility. The guard noticed her interest and frowned. "We need to keep moving, doctor. This area isn't secure." "What do you mean, not secure? This is a Supermax prison. Everything's supposed to be secure." The guard's expression shifted, just for a moment, revealing something underneath the professional mask.
Fear.
"Just trust me, doctor. We need to go."
Now.
They continued walking, faster now, the guard's hand resting on his weapon. Dr. Chen wanted to ask more questions, wanted to understand what made this corridor different from the others, but the tension rolling off the guard kept her silent. They were 20 feet from the exit door when she heard it. A voice, soft and melodic, drifting from one of the cells they'd just passed. "Dr. Chen."
Sarah.
"We've been waiting for you." She spun around, but the corridor was empty. Just closed doors and scratched walls and fluorescent lights buzzing their insect song. The guard grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the exit. "Don't respond," he hissed. "Don't acknowledge it. Just move." But the voice came again, from a different direction this time, or maybe from all directions at once. "You can't help them, Sarah. You can't save them. But maybe, if you're smart, you can save yourself. Come find me. Cell B17. We have so much to discuss." The exit door slammed behind them, cutting off the voice. Dr. Chen found herself in a security staging area, breathing hard, her heart hammering against her ribs. The guard was pale, his hands shaking as he radioed for additional support. "What the hell was that?" Dr. Chen demanded. "Who was speaking?" "I don't know," the guard said, and she could tell he was telling the truth. "The cells in that corridor are supposed to be empty. We moved everyone out of that section 6 months ago because of structural issues. There's nobody there. There can't be anybody there." But they'd both heard it. A voice, clear and distinct, speaking her name, inviting her to a cell that shouldn't contain anyone. Additional guards arrived, armed with rifles and riot gear. They escorted Dr. Chen out of the facility, through checkpoints and security gates, until she was standing in the parking lot, the cold Colorado air sharp against her face. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and purple that looked like bruises spreading across the horizon. Her rental car was where she'd left it that morning, in a spot near the outer fence. She got in, locked the doors, and sat there for a long moment, trying to process everything that had happened. Patrick Donovan's suicide. The list with her name. The voice in the empty corridor. Nothing made sense. Everything made sense. The world had turned upside down, and she was falling through it. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. Welcome to the game, Doctor. Round 1 begins tomorrow. Don't be late. A friend. She stared at the message, watching as it deleted itself automatically after 10 seconds, vanishing like it had never existed. Someone was testing her, measuring her reactions, seeing if she'd break or run or fight back. Dr. Chen started the car and drove toward her hotel, watching the prison disappear in her rear-view mirror. But she knew she'd be back. Not because Reeves had ordered her to or because of professional obligation, but because now it was personal. These inmates, whoever they were, whatever they were planning, they'd made a mistake. They'd pulled her into their game thinking she was just another piece to be moved around the board. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The hotel was a standard chain establishment 15 miles from the prison, the kind of place where federal employees stayed when they had business at ADX Florence. The lobby was empty except for a tired-looking clerk who barely glanced up as Dr. Chen checked in. Her room was on the 3rd floor, overlooking the parking lot and the dark plains beyond. She ordered room service, something she barely tasted, her mind too occupied with the day's events. The list of names. The patterns on the walls. The voice in the empty corridor. Pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together, like someone had mixed fragments from different pictures and expected her to make sense of the result. At midnight, unable to sleep, she opened her laptop and began researching. Vincent Marquez first. The man she'd be interviewing in the morning. Born in Tijuana, joined a cartel at 15, rose through the ranks with a combination of strategic brilliance and absolute ruthlessness. By 25, he was running operations that moved hundreds of millions of dollars across borders. By 30, he'd become one of the most wanted men in North America. His arrest had been a masterpiece of law enforcement coordination. DEA, FBI, Mexican federal police, all working together. They tracked him to a compound outside Juarez, surrounded him with 100 agents, demanded his surrender. Marquez had walked out with his hands up, smiling, like he'd been expecting them, like it was all part of some larger plan. At trial, he defended himself, representing his own interests with a legal acumen that shocked prosecutors and judges alike. He'd studied law in prison while awaiting trial, memorized precedents, found loopholes that even experienced lawyers had missed. He'd almost won, almost convinced a jury that the evidence was tainted, that his rights had been violated, that reasonable doubt existed. But in the end, the bodies were too numerous, the evidence too overwhelming. Life sentence, no possibility of parole. Immediate transfer to ADX Florence. The end of Vicente Marquez, or so everyone thought. Except Marquez hadn't ended. He'd adapted. According to the file Reeves had given her, he'd been a model prisoner for the first 3 years. Compliant, quiet, accepting of his isolation. Then something changed. The incident reports started piling up. Destroyed cell furniture. Attacks on guards during recreation time. Hunger strikes. And then, 2 years ago, complete silence. No more incidents. No more communication. Just a man sitting in his cell, staring at walls, apparently broken by the weight of isolation. But Dr. Chen knew better now. That silence wasn't surrender. It was preparation. Marquez had been waiting, planning, building something in the darkness of his concrete tomb. And tomorrow, she'd sit across from him and try to understand what that something was. She closed her laptop and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness. Somewhere out there, beyond the parking lot and the plains and the mountains, ADX Florence sat like a monument to human suffering. 350 inmates, each one locked in a 7 by 12-foot cell, each one counting the hours until death or madness. And 17 of them, according to Reeves, were part of something larger. A network. A conspiracy. A plan. Dr. Chen's reflection stared back at her from the dark window, ghostly and uncertain. She looked tired, scared, younger than her 38 years. She wondered if Patrick Donovan had stood at a window like this once, before they'd locked him away forever. Wondered if he'd known what was coming, if he'd prepared himself for the slow dissolution of identity that solitary confinement brings. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. "Sleep well, doctor. Tomorrow you meet the architect. He's been looking forward to it. A friend." The message deleted itself, leaving her staring at a blank screen. The architect. Marquez. The man who'd built an empire on blood and fear, who'd outsmarted law enforcement agencies across 2 countries, who'd adapted to imprisonment like it was just another business challenge to overcome. Tomorrow, she'd sit across from him in a concrete cell, separated by nothing but air and 2 years of cultivated silence. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. Dr. Chen set her phone on the nightstand and lay down on the bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep seemed impossible, but eventually exhaustion pulled her under, dragging her into dreams of concrete walls and voices in empty corridors and her own name written in blood across surfaces that shouldn't exist. When her alarm went off at 6 a.m., she woke with the certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The world she'd known, the rules she'd operated under, they were dissolving like mist in sunlight. And in their place, something darker was taking shape. Something that had been watching her all along. Something that was about to make its next move. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. Find resources. The drive back to ADX Florence felt like descending into the underworld. Dr. Chen gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, her knuckles white against the leather. The sun was rising behind her, casting long shadows across the Colorado plains, but ahead, where the prison sat like a concrete tumor on the landscape, everything remained dark. The facility seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, a black hole of human suffering and calculation. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Patrick Donovan's blood-written warnings, heard that voice in the empty corridor, felt the weight of 17 names pressing down on her chest like stones. But exhaustion couldn't touch the adrenaline singing through her veins. Today, she'd meet Vincent Marquez. Today, she'd start unraveling whatever these inmates had built in the darkness. The security checkpoints felt more invasive this morning, like the guards were searching for something specific. They went through her bag 3 times, examined her ID with unusual scrutiny, ran her through the metal detector twice. One guard pulled her aside and asked her to sign additional waivers, documents that absolved the prison of responsibility if anything happened during her interviews. Standard procedure, the guard said, but his eyes told a different story. He was scared. They all were. Marcus Webb met her inside the final checkpoint, looking like he hadn't slept either. His uniform was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, and when he shook her hand, his palm was clammy with nervous sweat. "Director Reeves briefed you on the security protocols?" he asked as they walked through the now familiar maze of corridors.
She did.
"I'll be in a secure interview room. Panic button within reach. Guards posted outside. Camera surveillance. Marquez will be restrained." "About that," Webb said, stopping outside a heavy steel door. "Marquez refused to come out of his cell this morning. Said if you want to talk to him, you have to come to him." Director Reeves approved it. Dr. Chen felt her stomach tighten. She approved me going into a cell? Alone. Not alone. I'll be right outside. The door stays open. You'll have a radio. At the first sign of trouble, you press the button and we extract you immediately. But doctor, I need you to understand something. Marquez isn't like other inmates. He's different.
Smarter.
More dangerous. In the 7 years I've worked with him, I've never seen him make a mistake. Never. Everything he does is calculated. If he wants you in his cell, It's because that serves his purpose somehow. Then I guess we'll find out what that purpose is. They walked deeper into the facility, into sections where the air felt heavier, more oppressive. The cells here were newer, more technologically advanced. Biometric locks, pressure sensors, cameras that could detect the slightest movement. These were the accommodations for the worst of the worst, the inmates too dangerous to house anywhere else. Cell D7. Vincent Marquez. Webb stopped at the door, his hand hovering over the control panel. Last chance to change your mind, Doctor. We can bring him to an interview room. It might take a few hours, but... Open it. The door slid aside with a hydraulic hiss that reminded Dr. Chun of something breathing. Inside, sitting on his concrete bed with his back against the wall, was Vincent Marquez. He was smaller than she expected. 5'8", maybe 160 pounds. His hair was completely gray despite being only 42 years old, cut short and neat. His face was angular, almost delicate, with dark eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. He wore the standard orange jumpsuit, but somehow he made it look like a choice rather than a requirement. Like he decided to wear orange today, and the prison had simply agreed. Dr. Chun, he said, his voice smooth and cultured, barely accented. Please come in. Forgive the accommodations. I'd offer you something to drink, but as you can see, my hospitality options are somewhat limited. She stepped into the cell, hyper-aware of Webb behind her, of the radio clipped to her belt, of the concrete walls that seemed to close in from all sides. Marquez gestured to the small concrete desk attached to the wall.
You can sit there if you like.
I promise not to bite. I've been a vegetarian for 3 years now. Ethics, you understand. One must maintain some standards, even in hell. Dr. Chun sat, pulling out her notebook, forcing her hands to remain steady. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Mr. Marquez.
Vincent, please.
We're going to become quite close, you and I. Might as well dispense with formalities. He smiled, and it was the most unsettling expression she'd ever seen. Not cruel, not cold, but genuinely warm. Like they were old friends catching up over coffee. You want to know about the network? About what we're building here? About why Patrick couldn't handle the pressure and took the coward's way out? You knew Patrick Donovan. I know everyone here, Doctor. That's my gift. Understanding people, seeing their potential, recognizing how the pieces fit together. Patrick was brilliant, truly exceptional, but he was weak. When he realized what we were really planning, when he understood the scope of it, his conscience caught up with him. Tragic, really. He could have been part of something magnificent. What are you planning? Marquez laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of bones.
Direct.
I appreciate that. Most people dance around the question, try to trick me into revealing information. But you just ask. That's why they chose you, isn't it? Because you're different. Because you see through the games. Answer the question. The question assumes I'm planning something criminal, something nefarious. But what if I told you we're planning something revolutionary? What if everything you think you know about this prison, about incarceration, about justice itself, is a lie? What then? Dr. Chun wrote in her notebook, documenting his words, his tone, his body language. He sat completely still, like a statue carved from flesh, only his eyes moving, tracking her every gesture. Director Reeves told me about Rivera, she said. The guard who died. The money in offshore accounts. You paid him to smuggle something into the prison. Did I? Or did someone else? See, that's the beauty of what we've built here, Doctor. Attribution becomes impossible. You can't prove who ordered what, who communicated with whom, who's running the operation. We're ghosts operating through ghosts. Shadows manipulating shadows. The surveillance system.
Panopticon.
You have access to it somehow. Marquez's smile widened. Very good. They briefed you well. Yes, we have something. Not Panopticon exactly, that technology is outdated, primitive compared to what exists now. But we have eyes everywhere. We know things we shouldn't know. We see things we shouldn't see. How else could Patrick have written your name before you were even approved for this evaluation? Then tell me something I don't know. Prove it. Very well. Marquez leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. 3 days ago, you had lunch with your mother at a restaurant in Boston. You ordered the salmon. She had the chicken. You argued about your work, about how dangerous it is, about how she wishes you'd chosen a safer career. She cried when you left. She thinks this might be the last time she sees you. Dr. Chin felt the blood drain from her face. The lunch had happened exactly as he described. She hadn't told anyone about it, hadn't posted about it on social media, hadn't mentioned it in any report or communication. It was a private moment between her and her mother. How? The restaurant has security cameras. The footage uploads to a cloud server. That server has vulnerabilities. Everything has vulnerabilities, doctor. The entire digital infrastructure of human civilization is held together with duct tape and prayers. Once you know where to look, once you understand how the systems connect, you can see everything. We've had access for years. We've been watching, learning, waiting. Then you're admitting to cybercrime, to surveillance, to violations that will add decades to your sentence. Marquez laughed again, genuinely amused. Add decades to a life sentence? Oh, doctor, you still don't understand. We're never leaving this place. Never. They'll bury us in these cells one by one, until we're all gone. So, what do we have to lose? What punishment can they threaten us with that's worse than this? He gestured at the concrete walls around them. We're already in hell. And when you have nothing left to lose, you become the most dangerous thing in the world. You become free. Dr. Chin stood up, suddenly needing distance from him, from his calm certainty, from the truth radiating off him like heat from a fire. If you're watching everything, if you know everything, then you know law enforcement is investigating. You know they'll shut you down eventually. Eventually. Such an interesting word. Because eventually could be days, months, years. And in that time, doctor, so much can happen. Systems can fail. Evidence can disappear. People can change their minds about what they've seen, what they know, what they're willing to testify about. Are you threatening me? I'm offering you context. Understanding. You see, everyone thinks we're planning an escape, or a terrorist attack, or some grand violent gesture. But that's not what this is about. This is about control. About demonstrating that walls and locks and guards don't matter anymore. About proving that the most secure prison in the world is just an illusion. We can reach anyone, anywhere, anytime. And once people understand that, once they truly comprehend what we're capable of, everything changes. Webb's voice came through the radio at her belt. Dr. Chen, we need to wrap this up. Time limit. But Marquez held up a hand, his eyes never leaving hers. Just one more minute.
Please.
There's something she needs to see. He reached under his mattress, moving slowly, telegraphing his movements so the cameras would catch everything. He pulled out a piece of paper, folded carefully, and held it out to her. This is for you. A gift. Call it a token of good faith. Dr. Chun hesitated, every instinct screaming not to take it, but curiosity won. She reached out, taking the paper from his fingers, careful not to let their skin touch. She unfolded it, reading the contents, and felt reality tilt sideways again. It was a detailed schematic. Blueprints. Not of the prison, but of the hotel where she was staying. Her room was marked with a red X, and written in precise, mechanical handwriting were the names and addresses of everyone she'd ever cared about. Her mother in Boston. Her sister in Seattle. Her best friend from college. Her ex-husband. Everyone. How long have you had this? She whispered. Since before you arrived. We've been preparing for you, doctor. Getting ready. Because you're important. You're the variable that could tilt everything in our favor or destroy everything we've built. So we needed to understand you. Your weaknesses. Your pressure points. Your triggers. This is blackmail. This is chess. And you just became a very important piece on the board. The question is, which side will you play for? The government that's using you as bait? Or us, the men who actually see you for what you are? Dr. Chin backed toward the door, the paper crumpling in her hand. This interview is over. Think about what I've said, Marquez called after her. Think about who's really manipulating you. The guards outside the cell? They're not here to protect you. They're here to make sure we don't reveal too much, too quickly. But we will reveal it, Doctor.
Soon.
And when we do, you'll have to choose. The cell door slid shut, cutting off his voice. Dr. Chen stood in the corridor, breathing hard, staring at the schematic in her hand. Webb was talking to her, asking if she was okay, but his words seemed to come from very far away. Her phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. Round 2 complete. You performed admirably. But the real test is coming. Check your email. A friend. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, opened her email app. At the top of her inbox was a message from an address she didn't recognize. No subject line. She clicked it. Inside was a video file. She pressed play. The footage showed her mother's house in Boston. Exterior, taken from across the street. The camera zoomed in on the living room window where her mother sat reading, unaware she was being watched. The timestamp was from this morning. 2 hours ago. The video ended. A new text appeared. We can protect them. Or we can't. Your choice. But choose quickly. Time is running out. Dr. Chen. Webb's voice finally penetrated the static in her head. Dr. Chen, what's wrong? She showed him the phone, the video, the schematic. Watched his face go pale. Watched him reach for his radio. Watched the prison's emergency protocols kick into action. Guards appeared from nowhere, surrounding her, escorting her back through the corridors toward the security office. But Dr. Chen wasn't scared anymore. She was angry. Marquez thought he was playing chess, thought he could threaten her family, thought he could force her to make a choice between her conscience and the people she loved. He'd made a mistake. Because now it was personal. They brought her to Director Reeves's office. The older woman was already on the phone, barking orders, coordinating responses. When she saw Dr. Chen, she hung up immediately. We're evacuating your family right now, Reeves said. FBI agents are en route to your mother's house, your sister's apartment, everyone on that list. They'll be in protective custody within the hour. You did the right thing bringing this to us immediately. It's not enough, Dr. Chen said. Don't you see? This is what they want. They want us reactive, defensive, always one step behind. They're proving they can reach anyone anywhere. Every move we make just demonstrates how vulnerable we are. Then what do you suggest? Dr. Chen laid the schematic on the desk, smoothing out the wrinkles. We go on offense. They think they're the only ones who can play this game, but they're wrong. They have vulnerabilities too, weaknesses. And I'm going to find them.
How?
By doing exactly what they expect. By interviewing the rest of them. James Crawford, Dmitry Volkov, all 17 names on that list. Each interview gives me more information, more insight into how they're organized, how they communicate, where the gaps in their system are. They're human, Director Reeves. They make mistakes. And I'm going to exploit every single one. Reeves studied her for a long moment. This isn't what we brought you here for. This has gone beyond evaluation, beyond observation. You're talking about active investigation, about taking them on directly. That's not your job. Then whose job is it? The FBI? CIA? They've been investigating for months and gotten nowhere. These inmates are too smart, too careful, too paranoid to slip up for traditional law enforcement. But a psychologist? Someone they think they can manipulate? Someone they've already started playing games with? That's different. That's an opening. It's also incredibly dangerous. If they realize you're working against them, they already know, Director. They've known from the beginning. But they think they can turn me, recruit me, make me part of their network. And I'm going to let them think that. Right up until the moment I destroy everything they've built. The room was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of steel doors opening and closing. Reeves walked to the window, looking out at the concrete yard where inmates were allowed 1 hour of recreation per day, alone in cages that looked like dog kennels. 12 years I've worked in corrections, Reeves said quietly. 12 years of seeing what incarceration does to people, good and bad. And I've never seen anything like this. Never seen inmates organize at this level, with this degree of sophistication. They've turned their punishment into power. their isolation into advantage. If we can't stop them, if what they're building here spreads to other prisons, other facilities, the entire correctional system could collapse. Then we stop them. Reeves turned back to her, and for the first time, Dr. Chen saw genuine respect in those cold eyes.
All right. We do this your way. You continue the interviews. You gather intelligence. You look for weaknesses.
But Dr. Chen, understand this. Once you commit to this path, there's no backing out. These men will test you in ways you can't imagine. They'll offer you things, threaten things, show you things that will make you question everything you believe. Are you prepared for that? I've been preparing for this my entire career. No, Reeves said softly. You haven't. Nobody has. Because this isn't just about interviewing criminals anymore. This is about surviving a war where the battlefield is inside your own mind. Dr. Chen thought about Marquez's smile, about Patrick Donovan's blood-written warnings, about that voice in the empty corridor inviting her to cell B17. She thought about her mother, her sister, everyone she loved now under FBI protection because she'd chosen to step into this darkness. When's my next interview? She asked. Tomorrow morning. James Crawford, the white supremacist leader. He specifically requested you. Of course he did. That night, back at the hotel, Dr. Chen sat at the small desk in her room, reviewing everything she'd learned. The list of names. The surveillance capabilities. The network of inmates working together despite being in solitary confinement. Pieces of a puzzle that was finally starting to make sense. They weren't planning an escape. They weren't organizing attacks. They were doing something far more ambitious. They were building a criminal organization that existed entirely within the prison system, using their isolation as protection, using surveillance technology to maintain control, using fear and manipulation to recruit assets on the outside. And once they perfected the system at ADX Florence, they could replicate it at every Supermax prison in the country. Hundreds of inmates, all the most dangerous criminals in America, coordinating their operations from inside concrete cells. It would be the largest criminal conspiracy in history, and it would be invisible to traditional law enforcement. Unless someone stopped it. Her phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. You impress Vincent. He thinks you might be one of us.
Tomorrow, James will test that theory.
Be ready. And doctor? Don't trust Reeves. She's not who she claims to be. A friend. The message deleted itself. Dr. Chen stared at her phone, thinking about that last line. Don't trust Reeves. Were they trying to turn her against her only ally? Or was it genuine warning? How could she tell the difference between truth and manipulation when everything was built on lies? She opened her laptop, started researching Amanda Reeves. Official biography, career history, press releases. Everything checked out. Deputy Director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, distinguished career, multiple commendations. No red flags. But then she dug deeper. Used her academic credentials to access databases most people couldn't see. Employment records. Travel logs. Financial disclosures. And there, buried in documents from 8 years ago, she found something interesting. Amanda Reeves had been part of the Panopticon program. Not as an operator, but as an oversight director. She'd been responsible for monitoring the CIA officers running the surveillance system, making sure they stayed within legal boundaries. She'd been there when the 7 operators disappeared. She'd signed off on the program's termination. And 3 months after Panopticon was officially shut down, she'd transferred to the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Started working her way up through the system, eventually landing the deputy director position with direct oversight of ADX Florence. Maybe it was coincidence.
Maybe it was smart career planning.
Or maybe, just maybe, Amanda Reeves had been positioned exactly where she needed to be when Panopticon technology started appearing inside a Supermax prison. Dr. Chen closed her laptop and walked to the window. Her reflection stared back at her, and she barely recognized herself. 2 days ago, she'd been a forensic psychologist conducting a routine evaluation. Now she was caught in a web of conspiracies and counter-conspiracies, unsure who to trust, uncertain what was real and what was manipulation.
Her phone buzzed again.
But this time it wasn't a text. It was a call. From a number she recognized. Her mother.
Mom? Dr. Chen answered, her voice cracking slightly. Are you okay? Are the FBI agents there? Sarah, her mother said, and she was crying. Sarah, they're here. But honey, they told me what's happening. They told me you're in danger. Please, please come home. Whatever you're doing out there, it's not worth your life. I can't, Mom. I have to finish this.
Why?
Why is this so important? Let someone else handle it. Let the professionals. I am a professional, Mom. This is what I do. This is what I've trained for my entire adult life. And these men, they think they can threaten my family, manipulate me, turn me into another one of their assets. I can't let that happen. Her mother was quiet for a moment, and Dr. Chen could hear the FBI agents talking in the background, coordinating security. Finally, her mother spoke again, and her voice was steadier. You sound like your father. When he was working that case in Chicago, the one that got him killed, he said the same things. That it was important. That he had to see it through. That he couldn't let the bad guys win. And then one night, 2 men with guns knocked on our door, and our lives changed forever. Dr. Chen felt tears burning behind her eyes. She'd been 7 years old when her father died, barely old enough to understand why he wasn't coming home anymore. But she remembered his face, his voice, the way he talked about his work like it mattered, like it meant something. I'm not going to die, Mom. You don't know that. None of us know that. Sarah, please. I already lost your father to this work. I can't lose you too. You won't. I promise. I'll be careful. I'll be smart. And when this is over, I'll come home and we'll have that talk you wanted. About my work, about my choices, about everything. I love you, sweetheart. I love you too, Mom. She hung up, wiped her eyes, and turned away from the window. Sleep wouldn't come easy tonight, but that was okay. She had work to do, research to complete, strategies to plan. Tomorrow, she'd meet James Crawford. And she'd be ready. The darkness outside her window seemed alive, watchful, full of eyes she couldn't see. Somewhere in that darkness, 17 inmates sat in concrete cells, planning, coordinating, building their empire of shadows. And somewhere in that darkness, the truth waited to be discovered. Dr. Chen opened her laptop again, pulled up James Crawford's file. White supremacist leader. Former Army Ranger. Expert in explosives and guerrilla warfare. Responsible for attacks across 5 states. 16 people dead, dozens more injured. He'd been in ADX Florence for 7 years, and according to the reports, he'd been a model prisoner. Quiet. Compliant. Reading books on philosophy and religion. But she knew better now. That compliance was camouflage. That silence was preparation. Crawford wasn't reformed. He was waiting. Tomorrow, she'd find out what he was waiting for. The next morning came too quickly. Dr. Chen dressed in the dark, her hotel room feeling more like a cell than a place of rest. She drove to ADX Florence through a Colorado sunrise that painted the sky in colors too beautiful for what she was about to do. The security checks were routine now, the guards' faces becoming familiar. They knew what she was doing, knew the danger she was walking into, and she could see the respect mixed with pity in their eyes. They thought she was brave. They thought she was stupid. They were probably right on both counts. Webb met her at the final checkpoint, handing her a coffee she hadn't asked for but desperately needed. Crawford's waiting for you, he said. Been up since 4 a.m., pacing a cell. He's excited, Doctor. I've never seen him excited about anything. It's unsettling. Where's Director Reeves? Conference call with Washington. The Director of National Intelligence wants a briefing on what we've uncovered. But she left instructions. 30 minutes maximum with Crawford. No exceptions. And if he makes any move that seems threatening, you abort immediately. They walked through the corridors, past cells where other inmates were beginning their daily routines, past the empty corridor where she'd heard that voice 2 days ago. Everything looked different now, like she was seeing the prison through new eyes. The scratches on the walls weren't random anymore. They were messages, coordinates, markers, and a language she was beginning to understand. Cell D12. James Crawford. The door slid open, revealing a man who looked nothing like his mugshots. Prison had changed him. His hair was long, pulled back in a ponytail. His face was gaunt, ascetic, like he'd been fasting for weeks. But his eyes were sharp, intelligent, burning with a fervor that made Dr. Chen's skin crawl. "Dr. Sarah Chen," Crawford said, his voice surprisingly soft. "The woman who thinks she can save us all. Please come in. We have so much to discuss." She stepped into the cell, and the door closed behind her, leaving her alone with a man who'd killed in the name of ideology, who'd bombed churches and mosques, who'd preached hatred and violence to anyone who'd listen. "Mr. Crawford." "James. And I know why you're here. Vincent told us all about you.
How smart you are.
How dedicated. How desperately you want to understand what we're building. Well, Doctor, I'm going to help you understand. I'm going to show you something that will change everything you think you know." He reached behind his back, and Dr. Chen's hand went to the radio at her belt, but Crawford just smiled.
Relax.
"I'm not armed. I'm just going to show you this." He pulled out a photograph, small and worn, like it had been handled many times. He held it out to her.
Take it.
"Look closely." Dr. Chen took the photograph, studied it. The image showed a group of men in suits standing outside what looked like a government building. She recognized some faces. Politicians. Agency directors. And there, third from the left, standing slightly apart from the others, was Amanda Reeves. But that wasn't what made Dr. Chen's blood run cold. Standing next to Reeves, his hand on her shoulder like they were old friends, was Patrick Donovan. But the timestamp on the photo was from 7 years ago, for years before Donovan was arrested, 3 years before anyone knew he was selling classified information. "That's impossible," Dr. Chen whispered. "Is it? Or is it exactly what it looks like?" "Donovan wasn't caught by accident, Doctor. He was sacrificed.
Part of a larger plan.
And Reeves? She's been part of that plan from the beginning. They needed someone inside the prison system, someone with access and authority. Someone who could manage the inmates they needed managed, who could look the other way when necessary, who could feed them information while pretending to investigate." "You're lying. This is manipulation. You're trying to turn me against her." "Someone had to," Reeves replied calmly. "When Panopticon was shut down, when all that capability just disappeared, did you really think it died? Technology doesn't die, Doctor. It evolves. It adapts. It finds new hosts. And I realized something that no one else understood. The best place to hide the most powerful surveillance system in the world wasn't in some CIA black site. It was here, in a prison, where everyone expected to be watched, where cameras and monitoring were normal, where no one would ever think to look for something more."
Why?
Why do all this? Because the real criminals aren't locked in cells, Doctor. They're running the system. Politicians taking bribes. Corporations exploiting workers. Intelligence agencies committing crimes they'll never be prosecuted for. The entire structure of power in this country is corrupt, and someone needed to document it. Someone needed to see everything, know everything, be able to prove it when the time came. So, you recruited the inmates? Used them to build your network. I gave them purpose. These men, they're brilliant. Dangerous, yes, but brilliant. And they were wasting away in isolation, their talents rotting behind concrete walls. So I offered them a deal. Help me build something that could actually change the world, and I'd give them meaning again. Agency.
Power.
They agreed, and together, we created something magnificent. Dr. Chen looked at the screens, at the inmates sitting peacefully in their open cells, and she understood the final piece of the puzzle. The lockdown. The open cells. This is your demonstration. You're proving you have complete control. More than control. I'm proving that prisons themselves are obsolete. Look at them, Doctor. Their doors are open. They could walk out. They could riot, attack guards, try to escape. But they're not. Because they've chosen to stay. Because they understand that the real power isn't in freedom. It's in information. In knowing everything while appearing to know nothing. And Patrick Donovan? His suicide. Theater. Very convincing theater, I admit. But necessary. We needed you invested. We needed you to believe the threat was real so you'd dig deeper, ask more questions, Uncover the truth we wanted you to find. Patrick's alive, obviously. In protective custody, helping us coordinate the next phase. Dr. Chun felt sick. Everything she'd believed, everything she'd fought for, it was all manipulation. She'd been a puppet dancing on strings she couldn't see, and the puppet master had been working for the government all along. So what now? You've shown me your operation. What happens to me? Reeves finally turned around, and her face was almost sad. That depends on you, Doctor. You can join us. Use your skills to help us expose the corruption we've documented. Be part of something that will reshape criminal justice in America. Or you can refuse, and we'll have to ensure your silence through less pleasant means. You're talking about blackmail. About threats against my family. I'm talking about reality. Your family is safe. They've always been safe. But we needed you to believe they were in danger, so you'd understand the stakes. This isn't a game, Dr. Chun. This is revolution. And every revolution requires people to make impossible choices. The screens behind Reeves flickered, showing different angles, different cells, different inmates. And then one screen changed, showing something that made Dr. Chen's heart stop. It was video from her mother's house in Boston. Real-time footage. Her mother, sitting in the living room, surrounded by FBI agents. But in the corner of the screen, just visible, was a laser sight. No, Dr. Chen whispered. Yes, Reeves said softly. This is what we're capable of. This is the power we've accumulated. We can protect or destroy anyone, anywhere, at any time. The question is, will you use that power with us or against us? Dr. Chen stared at the screen, at her mother laughing at something one of the agents said, completely unaware that death was pointed at her head from across the street. And she thought about her father, dying in Chicago because he'd chosen principle over pragmatism. She thought about Patrick Donovan, faking his suicide, becoming a ghost. She thought about Vincent Marquez and James Crawford and all the other inmates, brilliant and broken and dangerous, sitting in their cells with open doors and choosing to stay. If I refuse, she said slowly, you'll kill my mother. If you refuse, you become a liability we can't afford. And liabilities get eliminated. That's not a threat, Doctor. It's just practical reality. And if I agree, then you become part of the most significant intelligence operation in American history. You help us document the crimes of the powerful. You use your platform, your credentials, your access to expose truths that need to be told. And yes, you become complicit in methods that aren't always legal or ethical. But you'd be doing it for the right reasons. Dr. Chen closed her eyes, thinking through her options. She could agree, buy time, try to find a way to expose Reeves and shut down the operation from inside. But Reeves was too smart for that. She'd see through any deception. Or Dr. Chen could refuse, accept the consequences, hope that her mother survived long enough for someone to rescue her. Or there was a third option. One that Reeves hadn't considered because she'd been playing chess while Dr. Chen had been learning a different game entirely. I need to make a call, Dr. Chen said. One call. To my supervisor at the Department of Justice. If I'm going to do this, if I'm going to commit to this path, I need to properly resign my position.
Clean break.
No questions. Reeves studied her face, looking for deception, but Dr. Chen had spent her entire career learning to hide her thoughts. 5 minutes. Supervised. One call. She handed Dr. Chen a phone. A secure line, encrypted, impossible to trace. Dr. Chen dialed a number she'd memorized years ago, during her first week working with federal agencies. An emergency number, one that went directly to a crisis response team. The phone rang once.
Twice.
Then a voice answered. Dr. Chen. We've been monitoring the situation. Are you safe? No, she said clearly. And neither is anyone else. ADX Florence has been compromised. The entire facility is under control of a criminal network run by Director Amanda Reeves. They have surveillance on every prisoner, every staff member, and they're threatening civilians, including my mother. You need to activate emergency response protocols immediately. Reeves's face went white. She reached for the phone, but Dr. Chen stepped back. GPS is active on this phone, Dr. Chen continued. You have my exact location. Send everyone. FBI, ATF, U.S. Marshals. Lock down the entire facility. No one leaves. She ended the call and threw the phone to the ground, crushing it under her heel. Reeves stared at her, and for the first time, the cold certainty in her eyes was replaced with something else.
Fear.
You have no idea what you've done, Reeves whispered. The evidence we've collected, the documentation of corruption at the highest levels, it's all going to disappear now. You've destroyed the only chance we had to expose the truth. No, Dr. Chen said. I've stopped a criminal conspiracy. Whatever good you thought you were doing, whatever justice you believed you were serving, it doesn't matter. You threatened innocent people. You manipulated inmates. You broke every oath you ever took. And now you're going to pay for it. The screens behind Reeves started flickering, showing activity throughout the prison. Guards mobilizing. Inmates returning to their cells. The security systems coming back online as emergency protocols kicked in. The Empire of Shadows was collapsing in real time. Reeves lunged for her desk drawer, reaching for a weapon, but Dr. Chen was faster. She grabbed a keyboard from the nearest workstation and swung it hard, connecting with Reeves's temple. The older woman went down, stunned but conscious. You should have just been a prison director, Dr. Chen said. You were good at it. But you got greedy. You thought you could play God. Footsteps on the stairs. Heavy boots. Multiple units descending into the basement. The door burst open and FBI agents flooded in, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Dr. Chen raised her hands. Let them secure the room. Let them handcuff Reeves and read her rights. She answered questions in a voice that sounded steady despite the adrenaline crashing through her system. She identified Donovan, Crawford, Marquez, and every other inmate involved in the conspiracy. It took 6 hours to secure the facility completely. 6 hours of interviews, debriefings, evidence collection. The FBI found servers, documents, recordings, everything Reeves had compiled over years of operation. They found the offshore accounts, the shell corporations, the elaborate financial networks supporting the surveillance system. And they found something else. Something that made Dr. Chen's testimony even more crucial. Reeves had been telling the truth about one thing. She had documented corruption. Politicians taking bribes. Judges selling verdicts. Police chiefs covering up crimes. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable, and implicated hundreds of people in positions of power across the country. But she'd also documented her own crimes. The blackmail. The threats. The manipulation of inmates and staff. She'd been planning something beyond surveillance, beyond documentation. She'd been building leverage, creating a system where she could control outcomes, influence decisions, reshape the entire criminal justice system according to her vision. She'd become exactly what she claimed to be fighting against. As the sun set over ADX Florence that evening, Dr. Chen stood in the parking lot watching armored vehicles carry inmates to temporary facilities while federal investigators combed through every inch of the prison. The operation would take months to fully unravel. Trials would stretch for years. But it was over.
Her phone rang.
Her real phone, the one she'd left in her hotel room that morning. It was her mother. Sarah? Sarah, they told me you're okay. They said you saved everyone. Is that true? I don't know about saved, Mom. But it's over. The case is closed. I'm coming home. When?
Soon.
I have to finish giving testimony, help with the investigation. But soon. Maybe a week. I'll make your favorite dinner. I'll invite your sister. We'll celebrate properly. Dr. Chen smiled, feeling tears threatening again. That sounds perfect, Mom. I love you. I love you too, sweetheart.
And Sarah?
Your father would be proud. She ended the call and stood in the cold Colorado evening, watching the sky turn dark. Vincent Marquez was being led to a transport vehicle, handcuffed, his face calm and accepting. He saw her watching and smiled that unsettling smile. You won, he called out. Congratulations, doctor. But remember something. We were only the first. There are others. Other prisons. Other networks. Other people who've learned what we learned. This isn't over. It's just beginning. The agents pushed him into the vehicle, the door slammed shut, and he was gone. but his words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus Webb approached, looking exhausted. They want you back in D.C. tomorrow. Full debriefing with the Director of National Intelligence. You're going to be answering questions for months. I know. Was it worth it? Everything you went through? Everything you risked? Dr. Chen thought about Patrick Donovan hanging in his cell, about the blood-written warnings, about her mother's face on those surveillance screens. She thought about Reeves's cold eyes and Marquez's calculating smile and the 17 inmates who'd almost succeeded in revolutionizing criminal organization. Ask me again in a year, she said. 3 months later, Dr. Sarah Chen sat in a coffee shop in Boston, writing notes for a book she'd been commissioned to write about the ADX Florence conspiracy. The case had made international headlines. Reeves was awaiting trial on dozens of charges. The inmates involved had all been transferred to different facilities, their communication abilities restricted even further. The surveillance system had been completely dismantled. But Dr. Chen couldn't shake the feeling that Marquez had been right. This wasn't over. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You did well, doctor. You passed the test. But it was just a test. The real game starts now. Watch the news tonight. You'll understand. A friend. The message deleted itself automatically. Dr. Chen's hand trembled as she set down her phone. She opened her laptop, pulled up news sites, searching for anything unusual. And there it was, buried in the back pages. A small story that most people would miss. At a Supermax prison in California, all the cell doors had opened simultaneously that morning. For exactly 3 minutes. Then closed again. No injuries. No escapes. No explanation. And at the bottom of the article, a quote from an unnamed inmate. Tell Dr. Chen we're ready when she is. Dr. Chen closed her laptop slowly. Outside the coffee shop window, Boston moved through its normal rhythms, people walking past, unaware that beneath the surface of everyday life, something dark was growing. The inmates at ADX Florence hadn't been planning an escape. They'd been planning a demonstration. Proof of concept. And now that proof was spreading to other prisons, other networks, other groups of brilliant, dangerous people who'd learned that walls couldn't contain them anymore. She thought about calling the FBI.
About warning them. But what would she say?
That she got a text from an unknown number? That a news story felt ominous? Instead, she opened her notebook and started writing. Documenting. Recording. Because that's what she did. That's who she was. And somewhere in a concrete cell in a prison she'd never heard of, someone was watching. Waiting. Planning the next move in a game that would never truly end. Because the most dangerous prison in the world isn't made of concrete and steel. It's made of information. Of surveillance. Of the illusion of security in a world where true security no longer exists. And Dr. Sarah Chen had just learned that some doors, once opened, can never be truly closed again. She had survived ADX Florence. She had exposed the conspiracy. She had saved lives. But the voice in the empty corridor had been right all along. They were watching. They were listening. They knew everything. And now, so did she. The question was, what would she do with that knowledge? The coffee shop's television flickered to life for the evening news. The anchor's face was serious as she reported the breaking story. The coffee shop's television flickered to life for the evening news. The anchor's face was serious as she reported the breaking story. In a coordinated event that has authorities baffled, electronic security systems in 7 Supermax prisons across the United States experienced simultaneous failures this afternoon, resulting in brief cell door malfunctions. Officials stress that no escapes occurred and all facilities are now secure. However, sources indicate this may be related to the recent ADX Florence conspiracy. Dr. Chen closed her notebook. She had her answer. The game had just begun. And this time she knew the rules.
The end.
If this story left you questioning everything you thought you knew about justice, about surveillance, about the thin line between control and chaos, then you're not ready for what comes next. Hit that subscribe button because the next case will take you even deeper into the darkness. Drop a comment and tell me, could you survive 23 hours alone in America's worst prison? And remember, the monsters aren't always behind bars. Sometimes They're the ones holding the keys.